Now, I've got a couple of questions to you first before we go to questions from the floor. How much is cyber theft a threat to defence science and what we're doing here?
Cyber threat is certainly something that we need to be on top of. Now, we have wonderful capability in government through organisations such as ASD to make sure that Australian businesses and what we do within government is protected. It's always the human that is the weak spot in the loop, and that's why within defence we have a very high level of hygiene around how we deal with information and how we deal with security. It's something that we're very conscious of as we go out in partnering to make sure that we work in a way that keeps critical information secure for the nation. It's something that I think about a lot and that worries me, because if we're to generate ideas within Australia, we need them to be used for effect within Australia and not lost. So it's a critical problem, it's always under threat, and you always have to be vigilant and use best practice.
Another question I have is really in regards to nuclear capability that keeps popping up in the conversation. Does your organisation examine that possibility here, even though regulations currently restrict the use of nuclear material in, say, submarines and future submarine development?
Our role within defence, science and technology is to develop technologies within the policy context of our nation. And it's extremely clear that at the present time, the policy context is not nuclear, whether that be our subs or other energy considerations. We are very well plugged in and connected to the global research networks, and if ever that policy position were to change, we would work with partners internationally to gain that knowledge, but that is not something we focus on at present.
You are also the first female Defence Chief Scientist. Congratulations on achieving that. I did a little bit of research today and discovered that you have quite an accomplished record, that at a young age you looked first at perhaps being a cellist. Science wasn't on your radar at all, and you won a scholarship, but your mum intervened at one point, unhappy that you were looking to continue your school studies without doing science. How did you end up becoming hooked on science and physics?
I think my mum is watching, and she'll be thrilled to have been mentioned on national television, so thank you for that. Indeed, music's a great passion for me, and my 3 children are all fine young musicians. For me, what got me hooked was an amazing physics teacher, and so many scientists have the same story to tell, just the transformational power of a great teacher. Suddenly I could see that my love of creating, I used to compose, I loved to build things, was something I could do through science, that maths was the language of the universe, and that physics was a way of asking questions about that universe. And to me, suddenly, creativity was alive in science. And it's probably easier to be an amateur cellist and pianist and a professional scientist than the other way around, but it brings great joy. And I just hope we can find ways, through some of the really exciting problems we're working on, to get more kids excited about what they can do in science. Because I find that once staff come in the door and see what we work on, they tend to not want to leave.
And as I say, you've got a very impressive record. I think you got a PhD by the time you were 26. You've got 3 children, 2 of them are two are twins. I'm going to read this snippet for the audience because I think this is pretty gobsmacking. This is a piece that I got from the Cosmos magazine, and it's a quote: "If I can manage a team of 30 people remotely, dealing with multiple industry requests and grants and postdocs and students, have a 2-year-old at home, be expressing milk for my 2 premature twins, and dealing with acute reflux, throwing up half what they ate for 11 months, and sleep deprivation, and the fact that you get one twin to sleep and the other one wakes up, and then you've got 20 emails to answer, and the minister wants to speak with you. If you can do all of that, you can do anything." I reckon you can do anything. And I reckon I can hear an audible "you rock" lady around the nation at hearing that quote. What is the best advice that you can give to bosses and workers about that? Women who are trying to juggle amazing careers as well as family life?
Oh, what a wonderful question, and it's something I'm really passionate about. Recognise what they can do and be flexible in how they do it. You know, I think the current COVID-19 working arrangements is pushing us as a society to recognise delivery and outcomes rather than just being physically there. You know, that made such a difference to me when I had a young family. I remember when I returned to work after maternity leave with my first child, and I at one point was working 4 days a week, and the boss came up to me and said, "Are you happy working 4 days a week?" And I said, "It's perfect. I feel like I'm making progress, but I still get to meet with other mums and have more time with my baby." And he said, "Good, we'll call that full time." And it wasn't really about money. It was about recognition that you can deliver in a flexible way, and having that recognised just gave me so much energy, and I wanted to give back. So it's about flexibility, it's about recognising delivery regardless of how it's delivered. And I'd also say it's about, as an individual, just not being too hard on yourself. Do what you can do in the moment, reprioritise on the fly, and only worry about what you can control.
Sarah Ison.
Sarah Ison from the West Australian, thank you so much for your address. You mentioned the PM's speech yesterday. On that, he flagged looking at skills and skills training and really reviewing and potentially reforming that. How big a priority do STEM skills need to be? Do they need to be top of the list when it comes to doing any reform in that area? And just a second question, you mentioned Defence Science has been doing some forecasting and modelling of COVID. How much did the virus play out against what was predicted? Did the modelling predict something much, much greater, and actually what we're seeing is much less than we expected?
Thank you for those fabulous questions. So the first is STEM skills, and I would argue that they're the set of skills that we need most in our next generation. And that's not just because we need some much larger numbers of scientists in labs, but it's because the ability to look at growing volumes of data and evidence and make good decisions as technology develops fast is ever more important. So if we have a future where our decision makers, our leaders of industry, have a better level of training in STEM skills, we will be able to make better decisions as a society, and there are more jobs coming. Now, on pandemic modelling, it's quite sophisticated and has a lot of parameters, as you might imagine, and one of the ones that perhaps is always the most difficult to grapple with is the social aspect. How compliant will people be with restrictions? How compliant will people be with hand washing and personal hygiene? So when we do modelling, we do make assumptions about that level of compliance. And I'd have to say I've been thrilled with how well Australia has responded. It's been extraordinary. And I think the key is just that we cannot be complacent, because it doesn't take long for numbers infected to bounce back up and for the replication numbers to be over 1 again.
But did the spread of the virus meet the expectation of the forecasting, the numbers themselves of infection in Australia?
It's within the bounds, given the uncertainties in the social aspects, such as compliance to restriction. So the modelling does hold up and is always refined and always updated. And probably one of the most important things is that Defence Science has been bringing in expertise from the international counterparts so that we can learn from what other countries are facing where there has been greater spread to check our modelling for Australia. Thank you.
Simon Gross.
Simon Gross from Canberra IQ. The biggest procurement project at the moment across all portfolios is what the government's chosen to call for the Future Submarines project. They're going to have a very old-fashioned power system. They're going to be a cobbled together one-off nuclear platform with a non-nuclear power function. They're going to be probably in the water, the first one in about 20 years, and in the context of where underwater warfare is going to be dominated more and more by drones. How, as chief scientist, can you justify calling it the Future Submarines project? Wouldn't they be yesterday's submarines when they're actually in place?
Thank you for your question. While the operational capabilities are not something that I feel I should comment on and I would like to leave to Navy, what I will say is that the submarine program, the future submarine program, I think that name is warranted because of the spiral development we have to inject new technologies and new capabilities as they become mature. So the first submarines developed will not be the same as ones delivered in future because of the very significant investment we've got for defence scientists and engineers working hand in hand with the Navy to help bring on board those new technologies in that spiral development path. So that has been very deliberately crafted. I have a very significant number of staff that are working on this program, and it is an ambitious technological plan and one that I think will give Australia a real edge. So they will be our future submarines, and while there may be constraints, we will make sure the very best science and engineering is there to go on board them.
Nick Stewart.
G'day, Nick Stewart from the Canberra Times. I'd like to take that in a slightly different way. I mean, you talked about the role of physics, particularly when you were a young girl, the way it revealed the world to you, the way you got excited by that. The same with maths. We've seen, you referred also to Carl von Clausewitz, and the development that we've seen. You know, there are particular trends that have developed in military. We've had since the turn of the century the so-called revolution in military affairs. This has been looking at trends of miniaturisation, lethality, and greater remote control. Basically, all of these trends, the sort of things that you're saying with physics, it's about revealing the world. That's the great drive. Now you've got submarines which are underwater. They're pretending they're going to hide and be able to hide. This huge submarine that can't actually get away from anything. How on earth can you? And in fact, one of your 8 things is the star shots is specifically designed to reveal the world under the water. Correct. How can we pretend that in perhaps 10 years' time we might still have a workable submarine fleet, but in 50 years' time that we will possibly not have the ability of any possible potential adversary to actually reveal what's under the water. And given particularly that other nations are really developing their submarine fleets, shouldn't what we be doing is putting our money, we've only got a limited amount, putting it into the satellites and so on, revealing the water, going the way that science wants us to, and actually making things clearer rather than trying to hide?
Thank you for a lovely, rich physics question there. You have said yourself that one of our star shots is underwater surveillance. It's about understanding that ocean environment, and we have to, given the scale and nature of Australia's waters, and for our local security. There are some laws of physics, though, that come into place about how and how much one can reveal. How the ability to communicate underwater is limited by the laws of physics. So what we're doing is making sure we put appropriate investment into developing capabilities here in Australia that can ensure we have a lead in underwater surveillance. But at that same time, that insurance policy of that long trusted and tested vehicle, the submarine, we need to be absolutely at the forefront of their development because our national security depends on it. So it's about that balancing portfolio risk and understanding that while we may aspire to ubiquitous undersea surveillance, the laws of physics are likely to stop us at some point.
Mrs. Schubert.
Professor Monro, Misha Schubert, as a Director of the National Press Club today, but also disclosing my role with Science and Technology Australia. I was really interested by your remarks around how to drive stronger collaboration between industry and publicly funded research organisations and some of the things that you've done across DST to enable that. Can I invite you to perhaps offer a few thoughts about how we might do that more broadly across that broader suite of industry and public research in the country? And if I may seek the indulgence of the President for a second question. I always like to ask people in very senior roles, what keeps you awake at night?
Thank you. So I think the way we drive greater alignment between our knowledge engine in the country and the outcomes our country has is through fostering those deep partnerships between people who can use knowledge and people who create knowledge. I think too long we've seen them as enterprises that are separate, that academics in ivory towers come up with ideas, some of which may be applied down the train. That model doesn't work. Now, I think the last decade, the journey the Australian university system has gone on into reflect on how you measure impact of knowledge creation has been a fabulous journey. In coming into a public research agency for the first time in this role, what I've learned is that we play a really important pivot role where we connect the end user, whether that be industry or in our case the ADF, to that knowledge engine. And I think it's about just dissolving some of those boundaries and bringing those worlds together and valuing what impact the knowledge has, not purely its generation, which of course is important as well. Now, what keeps me awake at night? Some of the challenges currently facing our university sector are very concerning. Because research is not fully funded, it does create challenges for us to sustain the world-class system that we have today. There's always that balance as well for an organisation like mine in fighting the fires of today and developing the game-changing leap-ahead technologies we know we're going to need into the future. And I think the way we do it is shifting the emphasis, as we've done in this new More Together strategy, to the problems. Because what I've learned through my whole career and now in this role is if you know the problem you're trying to solve, everyone is energised. And as we've shown in COVID-19 and bushfires, we can be fast, we can be agile, as well as doing things that may take a decade to pull off.
Kind of segue off Mish's question. If you could, what would be the best advice that you would give a 20-year-old version of you?
Yeah. To not let the idea that science is hard put you off. You'll be surrounded by people who to you seem much more able to do the things you're interested in. And that's just perception. That the best science is actually about asking questions, being bold, and being willing to be vulnerable and just saying, I don't know, and I want to learn. The 20-year-old me knew I wanted to be a physicist. And yet I found there was a confidence gap between myself and often my male friends doing the same courses. So it'd just be not to question whether I could do it and take my passion for doing it as the confidence that I could.
Steve Lewis.
Thank you, Sabra. Steve Lewis, also Director of the National Press Club. Late last year, the United States Department of Defence released a really interesting research paper titled Cyborg Soldier 2050, Human-Machine Fusion and the Implications for the Future of Defence. Now, it wasn't an official document, but in that research document, the authors, who were very, very senior research scientists involved with defence, said it's anticipated that specialised operators, such as special forces soldiers, military pilots, intelligence personnel, spies, will be using neural implants for enhanced operation by 2030, 10 years from now, so well before the future subs. Can I ask you, what work is DST doing in this space? We're talking about the fusion of human beings and machines. We're talking about brain implants. We're talking about enhancing soldiers, special forces, so that they have a better capability to go out and fight the enemy, whoever they might be. How much work is going on into this space within DST, if I may ask? And it raises massive ethical, moral questions. I mean, you're essentially talking about putting chips, brain chips or implants into the human body and sending them out to fight on behalf of Australia. It's a huge issue, which 99.9% of the population know nothing about. So can we just have a bit of a chat about what work DST is doing? Are we working with the Americans, our closest military ally? Are we working with other countries, such as the People's Republic of China, in this space? Thank you.
Thank you for a very good question. So the first short response is we are all over tech foresight in terms of understanding what directions technology could take that may impact our people. We put a lot of emphasis in our own research on human-machine teaming. It's about amplification of the effect of one human through the use of multiple autonomous platforms and systems, as I mentioned in our talk. Within DST Group itself, we don't have significant capability in the biological and medical sciences. In fact, in Australia, that is predominantly in our university sector. And we're increasingly partnering, but not in these particularly contentious areas you talk about, largely around trying to do things like I mentioned in the speech, help our ADF know how to operate safely. So I agree there are ethical and moral challenges with some of the potential future directions of technology, and we don't go down in our own work those pathways without a really clear policy protection and provision.
Just to clarify, we're not working in this space at the moment.
No,
We're not developing technology that would allow Australian cyborg soldiers out into the field as early as 2030.
No.
Thank you.
You've given us some insights into the work that you are doing, but surely there'd be quite a lot of research that's happening under your watch that falls into the category, I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. Do you think if you were able to disclose that, would it knock people's socks off? Like, what kind of research are we doing compared to around the world?
Look, Sabra, the work our men and women do is extraordinary. Some of that we can talk about, and some of it I've shared with you today, and some of it, for very good reasons of security, have to be classified in different ways and can't be more generally discussed. We work on some of these secure aspects with our trusted Five Eyes nations and colleagues because they have some of these shared challenges, and we can help each other. A lot of the work that's done in this more secure classified environment is just as exciting, just as inspirational as the work I can share with you. But there are very good reasons why there needs to be a layer of protection over that to keep Australia and its interests protected.
Tim Shaw.
Thanks, Sabra. Professor Tim Shaw, Director of the National Press Club. Your address today was entitled How the Science of Defence and the Defence Industry Impact the Australian Community, and I think you've educated a lot of Australians that didn't even know what DST does. I've got a follow on from Sarah though. You've told us here today your work in relation to COVID-19. Can you specifically articulate the thoughts around the second and third waves of infection? We hear a lot from the PMO, from the Chief Medical Officer, the COVID Commission. Can you tell us what your researchers have advised those departments and those individuals about what, when and how second and third waves of COVID could impact Australia and its defence?
Look, thank you. And I know this is a question that's preying on many of our minds as we start to ease restrictions. As I mentioned, our scientists, our experts contribute to that whole of government effort. There's not a separate standalone activity that has different views. We provide models, we provide expertise into that whole of government positioning and information. And I have to say I've been really impressed with how people have pulled together across different departments to do that. So I don't have a separate view. We are comfortable that we are providing the right expertise into that whole of government decision making. And thus far, I think the numbers tell the story. Now, will there be a second or even a third wave? Inevitably. Because the difficult decisions we have as a nation, do you keep borders closed forever? What effect does that have on our society, on our economy? But the question is, what are those trade-offs, and when will our governments decide it's okay to gently turn on the tap? What the science does tell us, and this has been quite well communicated, the leading work came out of Imperial College in the UK, that probably the best management technique is a pulsed one, where you open the taps and then you start to close them again as the numbers go up, just to make sure that the health system can cope. The challenge for us is to make sure that we all understand that may happen. And that doesn't necessarily mean disaster or we've failed, but that might be an appropriate management strategy. And that's, comes to the heart of why we need people to have some understanding of STEM, of data of evidence. That's what the evidence tells us, that if we want to balance having a free and open economy and travel with health and the health system's capacity, we may have to ease and tighten restrictions over an extended period of time until we know there's a vaccine available.
Thank you.
Our final question is from John Miller.
Thank you, Sabra. John Millard from inside Canberra, and thank you, Professor Monro, for your informative
Come a little
address.
closer to the microphone,
Since
please, John.
since the invention of the gunpowder, most warfare has been concerned with hurling pieces of metal at each other, usually containing explosives. Taking at the realms of science fiction, and many scientists, which Asimov have, do you think we'll ever get to the stage where a laser beam or a proton beam or for that matter some other sort of beam, neutron or whatever it might be, will ever be an actual form of attack?
Thank you. And I'm an avid reader of science fiction, and there are certainly ideas they put in our minds.
Yeah.
Look, I'm a laser physicist, and there's no question that laser energy can have a direct, what we call non-kinetic effect. There is no question that lasers today are extraordinarily powerful and can start to do some of the things well beyond knocking out a sensor that can be a real threat in war. So I would absolutely say that non-kinetic warfare is in our future. But there are challenges in how we decide to counter such potential threats. Also advantages in that Australia has great capabilities and understanding in the field of photonics.
Thank you.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Professor Monro.